The morning sun rose lazily over the small Louisiana town of Bayou Ridge, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges that reflected off the muddy waters of the Mississippi River. Life in Bayou Ridge moved at its own slow pace. People knew each other's names, gossip spread faster than the river current, and the smell of freshly fried catfish often drifted from local diners. For Joe Miller, a seasoned fisherman who had spent nearly his whole life along these waters, it was just another day. Joe's boat creaked as he cast his net with the skill of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. The rhythmic splash of the water and the distant call of birds were the only sounds breaking the morning stillness. For Joe, fishing wasn't just a livelihood, it was a way of life. The river had always provided even when times were tough, but that day, the Mississippi would give him something far more disturbing than his usual catch. As Joe hauled in his net, he felt an unusual weight. The rope strained as if something heavy and strangely solid was tangled inside. Frowning, he pulled harder, expecting maybe a large branch or a piece of river debris. But when the net surfaced, his heart skipped a beat. Among the wriggling fish and tangled weeds lay something pale, oddly shaped, and unsettlingly human. Joe reached in carefully and lifted it out. At first glance, he thought it was just a denture, an old false set of teeth lost to the river long ago. But as he turned it in his hand, the realization set in. The teeth were far too realistic. The bone-colored base wasn't plastic, it was real bone. His stomach churned. This ain't right, Joe muttered to himself, his Cajun accent thick with unease. He could feel the tiny grooves on the teeth, the wear that came only from years of chewing. It wasn't fake, it was human. A chill ran down his spine despite the warm, humid air. Joe didn't waste any time. He wrapped the ghastly find in an old rag and steered his boat straight to shore. Every bump of the boat against the current made his grip tighten around the steering wheel. By the time he reached the dock, his hands were clammy and his heart pounded in his chest. The sheriff's office sat right off Main Street, a small brick building with a single flag waving lazily in the breeze. Sheriff Hank Peterson was an old friend of Joe's. They'd grown up together in Bayou Ridge. Hank was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with a graying beard and the calm demeanor of someone who had seen a lot in life, but still believed in doing right by his people. When Joe walked in holding the rag, Hank looked up from his paperwork. "Joe, you look like you've seen a ghost," Hank said, standing up slowly. "I might have found one," Joe replied grimly, setting the wrapped object on Hank's desk. Hank unwrapped the cloth. His eyes narrowed as soon as he saw the arc of teeth gleaming under the fluorescent light. He picked it up carefully with gloved hands, turning it over just as Joe had done earlier. "This ain't no denture," Hank said in a low voice. "This looks human." The room went silent. Even Hank, a man not easily rattled, felt the unease creeping in. Something about holding part of a human jawbone, still with teeth intact, was deeply unsettling. Hank placed it gently back on the desk. "I'm sending this to Baton Rouge for analysis. We'll see if forensics can tell us whose this might have been." Joe nodded. "You think it could be from, betrayed his worry, one of them old missing folks?" Hank didn't answer, but the thought had already crossed his mind. As Joe left the station, he glanced back at the sheriff's office one last time. The streets of Bayou Ridge seemed quieter than usual, as if the entire town felt the weight of what Joe had found, even if they didn't know it yet. That night, as the sun set behind the cypress trees, the rumor mill began to churn. By the next morning, everyone in town would be talking about Joe Miller's strange catch. Some called it a bad omen. Others whispered about unsolved murders and river ghosts. For Joe, however, one thought haunted him the most as he tried to sleep. Whose teeth had he just pulled from the depths of the Mississippi River? The next morning, Sheriff Hank Peterson couldn't get the jawbone out of his mind. The forensic lab in Baton Rouge had already confirmed it was real human bone belonging to an adult woman, but without more tests, they couldn't determine whose it was. Hank knew he had to act fast. Cases like this could stir up more than just fear. They could dig up ghosts people wanted to forget. Inside the small sheriff's office, the old air conditioning unit hummed as Hank sifted through decades of files. Dust floated in the morning light, streaming through the blinds. On the shelves were stacks of case folders dating back to the 1970s, when records were still typed on yellowed paper. Bayou Ridge was no stranger to tragedy. The river gave life, but it also took it away. Over the years, people had gone missing, fishermen swept away by the current, tourists who wandered too far into the swamps, and a few who vanished without explanation. Hank flipped open a thick file labeled Unsolved Disappearances, 1980-2000. One by one, he scanned the names. Thomas Brewer, vanished while boating. Clara Johnson, last seen walking home after work. Margaret Langford, a wealthy visitor from New Orleans who disappeared in 1993. She had come to town with friends for a weekend getaway. He remembered Margaret's case. She'd been seen at a riverside bar the night before she vanished. The investigation back then had gone nowhere, and some suspected she'd been kidnapped, but without evidence, the case went cold. Meanwhile, at the Baton Rouge lab, Dr. Emily Carter, a meticulous forensic odontologist, studied the jawbone under bright surgical lights. The teeth told a story: numerous fillings, expensive crowns, and dental work uncommon for someone from a rural background. Whoever this woman was, she had money. Emily called Hank. "Sheriff, this person likely came from a wealthy family. Judging by the dental work, she had access to top-tier care, probably someone from a big city like New Orleans. And based on where, I'd put her in her 40s. Hank's mind immediately went to Margaret. The details matched too closely to ignore. That evening, Hank called Joe Miller to update him. They sat on Joe's porch, the cicadas buzzing as the river glistened in the fading light. "So, you think this could be that rich lady who vanished all them years ago?" Joe asked, shaking his head. "It's possible," Hank said quietly. "But if it is, we're talking about reopening a case that some folks might want to stay buried." Joe took a long sip of beer and stared at the water. "Hank, you know this town. Secrets don't stay buried forever. Sooner or later, the river brings everything back." Word spread quickly in Bayou Ridge. People whispered in diners, at the bait shop, even in church pews. Some remembered the night Margaret Langford disappeared. Others claimed to know more than they let on. Hank and Emily decided to dig deeper. They visited Earl Jennings, a retired fisherman in his 80s, known for telling stories that blurred the line between truth and legend. Earl's memory was foggy, but when Hank mentioned Margaret's name, something lit up in his eyes. "I remember that gal," Earl rasped. "Pretty thing, dressed too fancy for a river town. She came here talking to folks she shouldn't have. She was asking questions about the night boats." "The night boats?" Emily asked. Earl leaned closer. "Back in the day, some folks used the river for more than fishing. Smuggling, bootlegging, things you didn't talk about. Word is, Margaret found out something she shouldn't have. Next thing we knew, she was gone." The pieces began to fall into place. Margaret's disappearance wasn't just a random tragedy. It was tied to organized smuggling that along the Mississippi for decades. Hank knew reopening this case would stir up old enemies, but he also knew that Bayou Ridge had been living under the shadow of corruption for far too long. Weeks later, DNA results came back. The jawbone belonged to Margaret Langford. The confirmation sent shockwaves through Bayou Ridge and New Orleans alike. Margaret's surviving relatives, now older and more bitter, demanded justice. Reopened the case, Hank, and uncovered old police reports that had been deliberately lost. They found evidence linking local politicians and wealthy businessmen to smuggling operations in the 1990s. Margaret, it turned out, had threatened to expose their crimes. The jawbone was the first real proof tying her disappearance to foul play. With the FBI involved, arrests followed. Some of Bayou Ridge's most respected citizens, but even with justice finally being served, complicit, one haunting question remained. If only the jawbone was found, where was the rest of Margaret's body? The river, it seemed, still kept some of its secrets. The mystery of Margaret Langford's disappearance reminds us that the past never truly stays buried. Decades-old secrets can resurface in the most unexpected ways, even in the muddy waters of the Mississippi River. Joe Miller's chilling discovery changed everything for Bayou Ridge, proving that even small towns can hide dark truths. Now we want to hear from you. What do you think really happened to Margaret on that fateful night in 1993? Was she silenced because she knew too much? Or is there an even darker story we still don't know? Share your theories in the comments. Your insight could bring a whole new perspective to this unsolved mystery. And if this story gave you chills, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into real-life mysteries and cold cases that still haunt communities to this day. The river may have revealed part of the truth, but maybe, just maybe, someone out there knows the rest. What would you do if you found something like this while fishing? Let us know below. The mystery of Margaret Langford's disappearance reminds us that the past never truly stays buried. Decades-old secrets can resurface in the most unexpected ways, even in the muddy waters of the Mississippi River. Joe Miller's chilling discovery changed everything for Bayou Ridge, proving that even small towns can hide dark truths. Now we want to hear from you. What do you think really happened to Margaret on that fateful night in 1993? Was she silenced because she knew too much? Or is there an even darker story we still don't know? Share your theories in the comments. Your insight could bring a whole new perspective to this unsolved mystery. And if this story gave you chills, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into real-life mysteries and cold cases that still haunt communities to this day. The river may have revealed part of the truth, but maybe, just maybe, someone out there knows the rest. What would you do if you found something like this while fishing? Let us know below.